The wind carried dust and the sound of gunfire across the Nebraska plains, and Quinton Sawyer knew he should have stayed clear of whatever trouble was brewing ahead. But his horse had already caught the scent of water and would not be deterred from the creek that ran through this particular stretch of prairie between Scottsbluff and the Wyoming border. It was late August in 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on everything it touched, turning the landscape into something that shimmered and wavered like a mirage. Quinton was 3 days into what should have been a 2-day cattle drive back to his ranch, having lost half a day tracking down strays that had spooked during a thunderstorm, and he was tired, thirsty, and in no mood for whatever chaos he was riding toward. But fate, as it often did in this unforgiving territory, had other plans entirely. The gunfire had stopped by the time he crested the low hill that overlooked the creek, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Quinton pulled his horse to a halt and surveyed the scene below. A overturned wagon sat half in the water, its contents scattered across the bank. 2 bodies lay motionless in the dirt, and circling buzzards overhead suggested they had been there for some time. He was about to turn away, to convince himself this was none of his business, when he heard it. The unmistakable cry of an infant, thin and desperate in the hot afternoon air. Quinton cursed under his breath and urged his horse forward, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle at his side. As he approached, he could see the bodies more clearly now. A man and a woman, both middle-aged, both shot. The man still clutched a shotgun in his rigid fingers, and the woman's face was turned toward the wagon as if she had been trying to reach something when she fell. The baby's cries grew louder, more insistent, and Quinton followed the sound to the far side of the overturned wagon where a young woman sat huddled against the wheel, a tiny bundle pressed against her chest. She could not have been more than 20 years old, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder and covered in dust, and there was a wild, desperate look in her eyes as she watched him approach. She held the baby tighter and shrank back against the wagon, and Quinton realized she was terrified of him. "Easy now," he said, holding up his hands to show they were empty. "I am not here to hurt you. I heard the baby crying from up on the ridge." The woman stared at him for a long moment, her chest heaving with quick, shallow breaths. The baby in her arms had stopped crying at the sound of his voice and was making soft, hiccuping sounds. Finally, she spoke, her voice hoarse and cracking. "They killed them. They killed my sister and her husband. They tried to take me, but I hid with the baby. We have nobody but each other now." The words hit Quinton like a physical blow. He had seen plenty of tragedy in his 32 years, had witnessed more than his share of violence and loss, but something about this young woman and the child in her arms stirred something deep in his chest. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements careful and unthreatening, and approached the wagon. "Who killed them?" he asked gently. "3 men," she whispered. "They wore bandanas over their faces, but I could see their eyes. They wanted the money my brother-in-law was carrying. He had just sold his herd in Scottsbluff. He fought them, and they shot him. My sister ran toward him, and they shot her too." Her voice broke on the last word, and tears began to stream down her dusty cheeks. "I was in the back of the wagon with little Samuel. I covered his mouth and hid under the canvas. They searched for a while, but then one of them said they heard horses coming, and they rode off with the money box." Quinton looked at the bodies again, then back at the young woman. "What is your name?" "Rosalie," she said. "Rosalie Richardson." "My sister was Margaret. Her husband was Thomas Harper." "I am Quinton Sawyer," he said. "I have a ranch about 6 miles south of here. We need to get you and the baby out of this sun, and we need to bury your sister and her husband properly. Can you stand?" Rosalie nodded and tried to push herself up, but her legs gave out beneath her. Quinton caught her before she fell, and he could feel how badly she was trembling. "When did this happen?" he asked. "Yesterday afternoon," she said. "I have been sitting here since then. I was too afraid to move in case they came back. I gave Samuel water from the creek, but he is hungry, and I do not know what to do. The food was all in the wagon, and it is spoiled now from sitting in the sun." Quinton looked down at the baby, who was indeed looking at him with wide, plaintive eyes. He could not have been more than 4 or 5 months old, with a round face and wispy brown hair. "Is Samuel your nephew?" "Yes," Rosalie said. "My sister and Thomas were traveling to Wyoming. They were going to start a new life there, and they asked me to come with them. I had nowhere else to go after our father died last spring." "Well, you both have somewhere to go now," Quinton said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "You are coming home with me. We will get you fed and rested, and then we will figure out what comes next. But first, we need to take care of your sister and Thomas." It took the better part of 2 hours to dig graves in the hard earth, and Quinton worked in the blazing heat while Rosalie sat in the shade of his horse and tried to keep Samuel calm. The baby was growing increasingly fussy, and Quinton knew they needed to get him to food soon. When the graves were finally ready, he wrapped the bodies as best he could in blankets from the wagon and lowered them into the ground. Rosalie stood with Samuel in her arms and spoke a prayer over them, her voice steady despite the tears that continued to fall. "Margaret was only 23, she said as Quinton filled in the graves. "She married Thomas 2 years ago, and they were so happy. Samuel was their first child. They wanted to give him a better life in Wyoming, away from the violence and the memories of the war." She paused, swallowing hard. "Now he will never know them." "He has you," Quinton said. "That counts for something." Rosalie looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I do not know how to raise a child. I am only 19 years old. I can barely take care of myself." "You will learn," Quinton said. "Same way everyone else does." He helped her onto his horse, settling her in the saddle with Samuel tucked securely against her chest. He would have to walk alongside them back to the ranch, but that was fine. The physical exertion would help clear his head, give him time to think about what he had just committed himself to. He had been alone on his ranch for 3 years, ever since his partner had been killed in a dispute over water rights. He had gotten used to the solitude, had even come to prefer it. But now, suddenly, he was responsible for a traumatized young woman and an infant child, and he had no idea what he was doing. The walk back to the ranch took nearly 3 hours, and by the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ranch house was modest but well built, with thick adobe walls that kept the interior cool even in the worst heat. Quinton had built it himself, along with the barn and the corrals, and he took a certain pride in the fact that everything was sturdy and functional. It was not fancy, but it was home. He helped Rosalie down from the horse and led her inside, where she stood in the middle of the main room looking lost and overwhelmed. Samuel was crying again, louder this time, and Quinton could see the panic rising in Rosalie's eyes. "He needs milk," she said desperately. "I do not have any way to feed him. I tried giving him water from the creek, but that only made him angrier." Quinton thought for a moment, then said, "I have a cow that just calved a few weeks ago. We can try giving him some of her milk. It is not ideal, but it is better than nothing." He went out to the barn and milked the cow, then brought the fresh milk back to the house in a clean jar. Rosalie had found a relatively clean cloth in the supplies Quinton had in his kitchen, and she soaked it in the milk and let Samuel suck on it. The baby latched onto the cloth eagerly, and gradually his cries subsided into soft, contented sounds. "That is better," Rosalie said, her shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank you. I was so afraid he was going to starve." "We will figure out something more permanent tomorrow," Quinton said. "For now, you both need rest. You can take the bedroom. I will sleep out here." Rosalie looked at him with surprise. "I cannot take your bedroom. You have already done so much for us." "I insist," Quinton said firmly. "You have been through hell and you need a proper bed." "It is not up for discussion." She opened her mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness." "You do not need to repay anything," Quinton said. "Just rest." He showed her to the bedroom, which was sparse but clean, with a large bed covered in a quilt his mother had made before she died. Rosalie looked around the room with weary gratitude and then sat down on the edge of the bed, with Samuel still clutched to her chest. "He is falling asleep," she whispered. "I think the milk helped." "Good," Quinton said. "There are clean clothes in the trunk if you want to change. They might be a bit big on you, but they are better than what you are wearing now." Rosalie looked down at her torn, filthy dress and nodded. "Thank you," she said again, and Quinton could hear the exhaustion in her voice. He left her alone and went back to the main room, where he poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat down at the table. His mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. He had gone from being a solitary rancher to being responsible for two other human beings in the span of an afternoon. It was overwhelming, and part of him wanted to ride back to that creek and pretend he had never heard that baby crying. But he knew he could not do that. Whatever had compelled him to stop and help, it was too strong to ignore now. He thought about Rosalie's face when she had told him that she and Samuel had nobody but each other. There had been such raw desperation in her eyes, such profound loneliness, and it had resonated with something deep inside him. He understood loneliness. He had lived with it for 3 years, had wrapped himself in it like a blanket. But seeing it reflected in someone else's eyes made him realize how heavy it had become, how much it had cost him. He finished his whiskey and stretched out on the floor in front of the fireplace, using his saddle as a pillow. It was not comfortable, but he had slept in worse places. As he closed his eyes, he could hear the soft sounds of Rosalie moving around in the bedroom and then, finally, silence. He hoped she was sleeping. God knew she needed it. The next morning, Quinton woke to the sound of Samuel crying. He sat up groggily and saw that the sun was already well above the horizon, which meant he had slept later than usual. He could hear Rosalie's voice from the bedroom, soft and soothing, trying to calm the baby. He stood and went to the kitchen, where he started a fire in the stove and put on a pot of coffee. By the time Rosalie emerged from the bedroom with Samuel in her arms, the smell of fresh coffee filled the house. "Good morning," she said tentatively. She had changed into one of his shirts, which hung on her small frame like a tent, and she had tied her hair back with a piece of string. Despite her clean clothes and the fact that she had obviously slept, she still looked exhausted. The events of the past 2 days had left deep shadows under her eyes, and her face was pale and drawn. "Morning," Quinton said. "Coffee, please," she said gratefully. She sat down at the table with Samuel balanced on her lap, and Quinton poured her a cup of coffee and set it in front of her. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug and inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for a moment as if drawing strength from the simple comfort of it. "How is Samuel?" Quinton asked. "Hungry," Rosalie said. "I gave him more milk on the cloth, but he needs something more substantial." "I am worried about him." "I have been thinking about that," Quinton said. "There is a woman in Scottsbluff, Mrs. Patterson, who runs a boarding house. She has a baby about Samuel's age, and she might be willing to help us find a way to feed him properly. Maybe she knows of a wet nurse or has some advice about bottles." Rosalie nodded. "That sounds good, But Scottsbluff is where Margaret and Thomas sold the herd. What if the men who killed them are still there? It is possible, Quinton admitted. But it is also the closest town, and we do not have a lot of options. I will go into town and talk to the sheriff, let him know what happened. And I will talk to Mrs. Patterson about Samuel. You can stay here where it is safe. No, Rosalie said firmly. I cannot stay here alone. What if those men come looking for me? What if they realize I was in the wagon and come back to finish what they started? I need to come with you. Quinton wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes. She had already been through so much, and he could not blame her for not wanting to be left alone. All right, he said, but we need to be careful. I will bring my rifle and we will stay alert. They set out for Scottsbluff an hour later, with Rosalie riding behind Quinton on his horse, and Samuel secured in a makeshift sling across her chest. The ride to town took most of the morning, and by the time they arrived, Samuel was fussing again, his little face red and scrunched with hunger and discomfort. Quinton could feel Rosalie's tension through the way she held onto him, her grip tight and nervous as they rode down the main street. Scottsbluff was a bustling town, the kind of place that had grown up quickly around the railroad and the cattle trade. The streets were crowded with wagons and horses, and the wooden sidewalks were filled with people going about their business. Quinton guided his horse to the sheriff's office and helped Rosalie dismount before tying the horse to the hitching post. Sheriff William Mackey was a gruff man in his 50s with a thick gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. He looked up from his desk when Quinton and Rosalie entered, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to concern when he saw the baby in Rosalie's arms. "Quinton," he said, nodding in greeting. "What brings you to town?" "Trouble," Quinton said. He proceeded to tell the sheriff everything that had happened, from finding the overturned wagon to burying Rosalie's sister and brother-in-law. Rosalie stood quietly beside him, her face pale as he recounted the details. When he finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair and rubbed a hand over his beard. "3 men with bandanas," he said thoughtfully. "Could be anyone. We have had a lot of drifters coming through lately, and not all of them are upstanding citizens." "Did you get a look at their horses or anything else that might help identify them?" Rosalie shook her head. "I was too frightened. I just hid and prayed they would not find us." "I understand," the sheriff said kindly. "I will put the word out, see if anyone has heard anything about 3 men with a stolen money box. In the meantime, you folks stay alert. If these men think there was a witness, they might come looking for Miss Richardson here." "That is what I am afraid of," Quinton said. "Which is why I need to make sure she and the baby are safe." The sheriff nodded. "You are doing the right thing, Quinton. Keep her close, and do not hesitate to defend yourselves if you need to. I will send word if I hear anything." They left the sheriff's office and made their way to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, which was a large 2-story building at the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson herself answered the door, a plump, cheerful woman with rosy cheeks and kind eyes. She took one look at the baby in Rosalie's arms and immediately ushered them inside. "Oh, you poor dears," she said, clucking her tongue. Come in, come in. What can I do to help?" Quinton explained the situation, and Mrs. Patterson's expression grew somber as she listened. "Those poor souls," she said. "What a terrible tragedy, but do not you worry about this little one. I have just the thing." She disappeared into the back of the house and returned a few minutes later with a glass bottle fitted with a rubber nipple. "This is what I use for my own baby when I need to be away from him. You can fill it with milk, and it should work just fine for Samuel." Rosalie took the bottle with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to us." "I am happy to help," Mrs. Patterson said, And if you need anything else, you just come find me. It takes a village to raise a child, and you have got a village here in Scottsbluff, whether you know it or not. They left the boarding house with the bottle and several clean cloths Mrs. Patterson had insisted they take, and Rosalie fed Samuel as they sat on a bench outside the general store. The baby drank eagerly, his little hands curling around the bottle, and Rosalie watched him with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "He looks just like Margaret," she said softly. "He has her eyes." Quinton did not know what to say to that, so he just sat quietly beside her and waited for Samuel to finish eating. When the baby was finally satisfied, Rosalie burped him gently and then looked at Quinton with an expression he could not quite read. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Why are you helping us?" Quinton thought about the question for a long moment. "Because you needed help," he said finally, "and because I know what it is like to be alone. My parents died when I was young, and I spent most of my life working for other people, trying to scrape together enough to buy my own place. When I finally got this ranch, it felt like everything I had worked for had finally come together. But then my partner died, and I realized that having a place of your own does not mean much if you do not have anyone to share it with." Rosalie looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "You are lonely," she said quietly. "I am," Quinton admitted. "And I saw that same loneliness in you yesterday. I guess I wanted to do something about it, for both of us." They sat in silence for a while, watching the people of Scottsbluff go about their business. Finally, Rosalie said, "I do not want to be a burden to you, Quinton. If there is somewhere else I should go, some other arrangement I should make, please tell me." "There is nowhere else," Quinton said. "You and Samuel can stay at the ranch for as long as you need. Longer if you want. I have plenty of room and I could use the company." Rosalie's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away quickly, as if embarrassed by her emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have given us a second chance at life, and I will never forget that." They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon, and when they arrived, Quinton showed Rosalie around the property more thoroughly than he had the night before. He showed her the barn, where the horses and the cow were kept, and the chicken coop, where a dozen hens clucked and scratched in the dirt. He showed her the vegetable garden he had been trying to maintain, though it was clear he was not much of a gardener. And he showed her the wide, open expanse of land that stretched out in all directions, dotted with grazing cattle and framed by distant mountains. "This is beautiful," Rosalie said, shielding her eyes from the sun as she looked out over the land. "I can see why you love it here." "It is not much," Quinton said, "but it is mine, ours, I guess now." Rosalie looked at him sharply. "What do you mean, ours?" "I mean you live here now," Quinton said. "You and Samuel. This is your home too for as long as you want it to be." Rosalie seemed about to say something, but then Samuel started crying again, and she turned her attention to soothing him. Quinton watched her as she rocked the baby gently, murmuring soft words to him, and he felt something shift in his chest. It was a feeling he had not experienced in a long time, something warm and protective and entirely unexpected. Over the next few weeks, a routine began to develop. Quinton would rise early and tend to the animals and the ranch work, while Rosalie took care of Samuel and managed the house. She turned out to be an excellent cook, and the meals she prepared were far better than anything Quinton had managed to make for himself in the years he had been alone. She also began working on the garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil with a patience and care that impressed him. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence that had grown between them. Samuel was thriving. The cow's milk agreed with him, and he was growing plumper and more alert every day. Rosalie doted on him, and Quinton found himself growing attached to the baby as well. He would sometimes hold Samuel while Rosalie prepared dinner, and the baby would stare up at him with wide, curious eyes, as if trying to figure out who this strange man was. "He likes you," Rosalie said one evening, smiling as she watched Quinton bounce Samuel gently on his knee. "I think he just likes the fact that I am tall enough to give him a good view of the room," Quinton said, but he could not hide the pleased tone in his voice. "No, he likes you," Rosalie insisted. "Babies can tell when someone cares about them. He knows you are looking out for him." Quinton looked down at Samuel, who was gnawing happily on his own fist, and felt that warm, protective feeling again. "I guess I am," he said. One night, about a month after Rosalie and Samuel had come to live at the ranch, Quinton woke to the sound of crying. It was not Samuel this time, though, it was Rosalie. He lay still for a moment, unsure of what to do, and then he heard her voice, muffled but desperate, calling out for her sister. He got up and went to the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, and knocked gently. "Rosalie," he said. "Are you all right?" The crying stopped abruptly, and there was a long silence. Then Rosalie's voice, thick with tears, said, "I am sorry, I did not mean to wake you." "You did not wake me," Quinton lied. "Can I come in?" Another silence, and then, "Yes." He pushed the door open and stepped into the room. Rosalie was sitting up in bed with Samuel asleep beside her, and her face was wet with tears. She looked at him with such raw pain that it made his heart ache. "I had a nightmare," she said. "I dreamed that Margaret was still alive, and she was asking me why I did not save her. She kept asking me over and over, and I could not answer her." Quinton sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb Samuel. "It was not your fault," he said gently. "There was nothing you could have done." "I know that in my head," Rosalie said, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "But my heart does not believe it. I keep thinking that if I had done something differently, maybe she would still be here. Maybe Thomas would still be here and Samuel would have his parents." "You did the only thing you could do," Quinton said. "You protected Samuel. You kept him safe. That is what Margaret would have wanted. That is what any mother would want." Rosalie looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "You are a good man, Quinton Sawyer," she said. "I do not know what I would have done without you." "You are stronger than you think," Quinton said. "You would have found a way." "Maybe," Rosalie said. "But I am glad I did not have to." They sat in silence for a while, and then Quinton reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were small and cold in his, and he squeezed them gently. "You are not alone," he said. "You have me. You have Samuel. We are a family now, even if it is not the family you expected." Rosalie's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. These were not tears of grief, but of something else, something softer and more hopeful. "A family," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Quinton said. As the weeks turned into months, Quinton and Rosalie's relationship began to deepen. What had started as a practical arrangement, a way for both of them to survive their respective loneliness, was slowly transforming into something more. Quinton found himself thinking about Rosalie constantly, noticing small things about her that made his heart race. The way she hummed softly to Samuel when she thought no one was listening. The way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating on something. Rosalie, for her part, was equally affected. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when Quinton would come in from working on the ranch, his shirt damp with sweat and his face tanned from the sun. She loved the way he was so gentle with Samuel, the way he would talk to the baby as if he were an adult, explaining the intricacies of ranching and cattle and the weather. She loved his quiet strength, the way he never raised his voice or lost his temper, even when things went wrong. One evening in early October, they were sitting on the porch as usual, watching the stars come out one by one in the darkening sky. Samuel was asleep inside, and the air was cool and crisp with the promise of autumn. Rosalie had wrapped herself in a shawl, and Quinton had built a small fire in the outdoor pit to take the edge off the chill. "I have been thinking," Rosalie said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "About what happens next." Quinton looked at her, his heart sinking. He had been dreading this conversation, afraid that she would tell him it was time for her and Samuel to move on, to find a place of their own. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "I mean, we cannot keep living like this forever," Rosalie said. "With me in your bedroom and you sleeping on the floor, it is not right. You should have your own bed back." "I am fine where I am," Quinton said quickly. "I do not mind." "But I do," Rosalie said. She turned to look at him, and in the firelight her eyes were serious and steady. "Quinton, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right words for weeks now, but I keep chickening out, so I am just going to say it." She took a deep breath. "I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Quinton could not breathe. He stared at her, his mind racing, trying to process what she had just said. "You are what?" he finally managed. "I am falling in love with you," Rosalie repeated, her cheeks flushing pink. "Maybe I already have fallen, I do not know. All I know is that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is seeing you. And when I go to bed at night, I think about how lucky I am that you found me that day by the creek. You saved my life, Quinton. You saved Samuel's life. And you have given us a home and a family, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Quinton felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Rosalie," he said, his voice rough. "I feel the same way. I have felt the same way for weeks now, but I did not want to say anything because I thought it was too soon, or that you were still grieving, or that you would think I was taking advantage of you." "You could never take advantage of me," Rosalie said. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever met, and I know it has only been a few months, but I also know what I feel. I love you, Quinton. I want to build a life with you. I want Samuel to grow up knowing you as his father. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep next to you every night. If you will have me." Quinton's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. He pulled her close and kissed her, slow and deep, pouring all of his pent-up feelings into that single moment. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Rosalie was smiling so wide it looked like her face might split in two. "I will take that as a yes," she said, laughing. "Yes," Quinton said, grinning. "1,000 times yes." They decided to get married as soon as possible. There was no point in waiting. They both agreed, when they were so sure of what they wanted. Sheriff Mackey agreed to perform the ceremony, and Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting a small reception at her boarding house. The wedding took place on a crisp Saturday morning in late October, with Samuel in Rosalie's arms and a small group of townspeople and neighbors gathered to witness the union. Rosalie wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had lent her, and Quinton wore his best shirt and a new hat he had bought especially for the occasion. As they stood before the sheriff and exchanged vows, Quinton felt a sense of rightness that he had never experienced before. This was where he was supposed to be, with this woman and this child, building a life together. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch, where Quinton carried Rosalie over the threshold in the time-honored tradition. She laughed and protested that it was silly, but he could see the happiness in her eyes. That night, they moved into the bedroom together, and for the first time since Rosalie had arrived, Quinton slept in his own bed, with his wife curled up beside him and Samuel in a cradle nearby. The next few months were some of the happiest of Quinton's life. He and Rosalie settled into married life with surprising ease, and their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. They worked the ranch together, with Rosalie proving to be a quick learner when it came to handling livestock and managing supplies. Samuel continued to grow and thrive, reaching the milestones that babies do, rolling over, sitting up, laughing at everything and nothing. In the spring of 1879, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinton one evening after Samuel had gone to bed, and the look of joy on his face made her cry happy tears. They spent the next several months preparing for the new baby, building a second cradle and gathering supplies. Quinton found himself constantly worrying about Rosalie, making sure she was not working too hard or lifting anything too heavy. She would laugh at his overprotectiveness, but he could tell she appreciated it. Their daughter was born on a hot July afternoon, with Mrs. Patterson serving as midwife. It was a difficult labor, and there were moments when Quinton feared he might lose Rosalie. But she was strong and determined, and by evening they had a healthy baby girl with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. They named her Margaret, after Rosalie's sister, and when Rosalie held her daughter for the first time, she wept with a mixture of joy and sorrow. "I wish she could have met her," Rosalie said, looking down at the baby. "I wish Margaret could see that her son has a family, that he is loved and cared for." "I think she knows," Quinton said, sitting beside his wife on the bed. "I think she is watching over all of us." "I hope so," Rosalie said. Samuel, now almost a year old, was fascinated by his new baby sister. He would toddle over to the cradle and stare down at her with wide, curious eyes, sometimes reaching out to touch her tiny hand. Quinton and Rosalie watched him with their daughter and felt their hearts swell with love. They had created something beautiful together, something that had seemed impossible just a year ago. As the seasons changed and the years passed, the ranch prospered. Quinton's cattle herd grew, and he was able to hire a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. Rosalie continued to manage the house and the garden, and she proved to be a natural at raising chickens and preserving food for the winter. Samuel and Margaret grew into bright, energetic children who loved nothing more than following their father around the ranch, asking endless questions and getting into endless mischief. In the winter of 1881, Sheriff Mackey came to the ranch with news. The three men who had killed Rosalie's sister and brother-in-law had been caught in Wyoming, attempting to rob a stagecoach. They had confessed to the murders under questioning, and they were now awaiting trial. The sheriff wanted to know if Rosalie would be willing to testify against them. Rosalie was quiet for a long time after the sheriff left, and Quinton could see the old pain flickering in her eyes. "I do not know if I can face them," she said finally. "I do not know if I can stand up in a courtroom and look at the men who killed my sister." "You do not have to," Quinton said. "If you do not want to do it, we will find another way." "But if I do not testify, they might go free," Rosalie said. "And I cannot let that happen. Margaret and Thomas deserve justice." In the end, Rosalie decided to testify. Quinton went with her to Wyoming, leaving Samuel and Margaret in the care of Mrs. Patterson. The trial was difficult and emotionally draining, and there were moments when Rosalie broke down on the witness stand, unable to continue. But she persevered, and her testimony was powerful enough to convince the jury. All three men were found guilty and sentenced to hang. On the way back to the ranch, Rosalie was quiet, staring out at the passing landscape. Quinton reached over and took her hand. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Relieved," Rosalie said, "and sad, and grateful. I am grateful that those men will never hurt anyone else, but I am also sad that it took so long to find them. And I am grateful more than I can say that I have you, that we have built this life together. Because without you, I do not think I would have survived any of this." "You would have," Quinton said. "You are the strongest person I know, but I am glad you did not have to do it alone." When they returned to the ranch, Samuel and Margaret ran out to meet them, and Quinton scooped them both up in his arms, spinning them around until they shrieked with laughter. Rosalie watched them with a smile, and Quinton could see the weight lifting from her shoulders. The past was behind them now, finally and completely. They could move forward. In 1883, Rosalie gave birth to their second son, whom they named Thomas after her late brother-in-law. The birth was easier this time, and Thomas was a calm, easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world around him with quiet curiosity. Samuel, now 5 years old, took his role as big brother very seriously, and he was always eager to help with the baby. Margaret, at 4, was less interested in her new brother and more interested in the horses and the cattle, much to Quinton's delight. One evening in the fall of 1884, Quinton and Rosalie sat on the porch as they had done so many times before, watching the sun set over the ranch. The children were inside, Samuel and Margaret playing a game while Thomas slept peacefully in his cradle. Quinton reached over and took Rosalie's hand, and she squeezed his fingers gently. "You remember the day we met?" Quinton asked. "Of course I do," Rosalie said. "How could I forget? It was the worst and best day of my life." "I think about it sometimes," Quinton said, "about how different things might have been if I had ridden past that creek without stopping, if I had decided it was not my problem and kept going." "But you did not," Rosalie said. "You stopped. You helped us. You saved us." "No," Quinton said. "We saved each other." Rosalie smiled. "Maybe we did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to deep purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound was carried on the wind across the open plains. Quinton thought about the life they had built together, about the children they were raising and the future that stretched out before them. It was not the life he had imagined for himself all those years ago when he had first bought this land, but it was better, so much better. "I love you," he said, turning to look at Rosalie. "I love you too," she said. "Always." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. In 1886, Quinton and Rosalie celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary, and they threw a large party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from Scottsbluff and the surrounding areas. Mrs. Patterson came with her family, and Sheriff Mackey brought his wife. The children ran wild, playing games and eating too much cake, and the adults sat around the fire, telling stories and laughing. Samuel was growing into a fine young boy, tall for his age and already showing an interest in ranching. He would spend hours following his father around, learning how to mend fences and care for the cattle. Margaret was as wild as the plains themselves, always climbing trees and riding horses and getting into trouble. Thomas was a quiet, thoughtful child who preferred books to manual labor, and Quinton and Rosalie encouraged his love of learning, even though it meant making the long trip to Scottsbluff to buy him books from the general store. In 1889, when Samuel was 10, Margaret was 8, and Thomas was 6, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant again. She was 30 years old now, and she worried that she might be too old for another baby, but Quinton reassured her that everything would be fine. Their 4th child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born in the spring of 1890, and she was the spitting image of her mother, with dark hair and bright, intelligent eyes. The ranch continued to prosper, and by the early 1890s, Quinton had built it into one of the most successful operations in the region. He employed several ranch hands and had expanded his herd significantly. Rosalie had turned her garden into a thriving enterprise, selling vegetables and preserves to the general store in Scottsbluff. Together, they had created a life that was far beyond what either of them had dreamed possible that day by the creek. But success did not change them. They remained humble and hardworking, instilling those same values in their children. They taught Samuel, Margaret, Thomas, and Sarah the importance of kindness, honesty, and hard work. They made sure the children knew the story of how Quinton and Rosalie had met, and how Samuel had been orphaned as a baby. Samuel knew that Quinton was not his biological father, but he loved him just the same, and he never felt any different from his siblings. In the summer of 1895, Samuel, now 16, asked Quinton if they could visit the place where his biological parents were buried. Quinton agreed, and the two of them rode out to the creek where it had all begun 17 years earlier. The graves were still there, though they were weathered and overgrown. Samuel stood looking down at them for a long time, and then he said, "I wish I could have known them." "I wish you could have too," Quinton said, "but I hope you know that they loved you very much. Your mother, Margaret, fought to protect you. And your aunt, the woman I married, she has loved you every day of your life like you were her own." "I know," Samuel said, "and I am grateful. I have had a good life, a better life than I probably would have had if things had turned out differently. But I still wonder sometimes what it would have been like." "That is natural," Quinton said, "but do not spend too much time dwelling on what might have been. Focus on what is and what will be." Samuel nodded. "You are right. Thank you, Father." Quinton felt his throat tighten at the word. Samuel rarely called him father, usually preferring the more casual pa, and hearing it now in this place was deeply moving. "You are welcome, son," he said. They rode back to the ranch together, and when they arrived, Rosalie was waiting on the porch. She could tell from their faces that the visit had been emotional, and she wrapped Samuel in a tight hug. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Ma," Samuel said. The next several years were good ones. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man who took on more and more responsibility at the ranch. Margaret, true to her wild nature, fell in love with a young cowboy named Daniel who worked on a neighboring ranch, and they were married in 1898 when she was 17. Thomas, ever the scholar, left home to attend university in the East, something that filled Quinton and Rosalie with both pride and sadness. Sarah grew into a lovely young woman with her mother's kindness and her father's work ethic. In the fall of 1900, Quinton and Rosalie celebrated their 21st wedding anniversary. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray and their faces lined with the years, but they were still deeply in love. They sat on the porch as they had done countless times before, holding hands and watching the sun set. "Can you believe it has been 21 years?" Rosalie asked. "No," Quinton said. "It feels like it was just yesterday that I found you by that creek, scared and alone with Samuel in your arms." "We have come a long way since then," Rosalie said. "We have," Quinton agreed, "and I would not change a single moment of it." "Not even the hard times?" Rosalie asked. "Especially not the hard times," Quinton said, "because those are the times that made us who we are. Those are the times that taught us how strong we could be together." Rosalie leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am so glad you stopped that day," she said. "I am so glad you did not just ride past." "So am I," Quinton said. "So am I." As the new century dawned, Quinton and Rosalie looked forward to the future with hope and optimism. Samuel had taken over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Quinton to slow down and enjoy his later years. Margaret and Daniel had given them 2 grandchildren, and Thomas had written to say he would be coming home for a visit soon. Sarah was being courted by a young man from Scottsbluff, and Quinton was already preparing himself for the day when she would leave to start a family of her own. But even as their children grew and moved on with their lives, Quinton and Rosalie remained each other's constant. They had weathered storms and droughts, good years and bad, but through it all, they had had each other. And that, they both knew, was the greatest blessing of all. One evening in the spring of 1902, as they sat on the porch watching yet another sunset, Quinton turned to Rosalie and said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first day? You said we have nobody but each other." "I remember," Rosalie said. "Well, I just want you to know that you were wrong," Quinton said with a smile. "We have so much more than each other now. We have our children and our grandchildren. We have this ranch and this life we have built. We have friends and neighbors who care about us. We have everything." Rosalie laughed, her eyes sparkling. "You are right," she said. "We do have everything. But you know what? I still think the best thing we have is each other." "You are absolutely right about that," Quinton said, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. "You are absolutely right." They continued to sit there as the stars came out one by one, filling the vast Nebraska sky with their light. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of new grass and wildflowers. In the distance, they could hear the lowing of cattle and the soft whinny of horses settling in for the night. Somewhere inside the house, Samuel was talking with Sarah, their voices a low, comforting murmur. Quinton thought back to the man he had been before he met Rosalie, solitary and set in his ways, convinced that he was content with his lonely existence. He had been so wrong. He had not known what true contentment was until he had someone to share it with, until he had a family to love and protect. Finding Rosalie and Samuel that day had not just saved them, it had saved him too. "What are you thinking about?" Rosalie asked, noticing the faraway look in his eyes. "Just about how lucky I am," Quinton said. "How lucky we are." "We are lucky," Rosalie agreed. "But I also think we made our own luck. We chose to build this life together. We chose to love each other and work hard and never give up. That is not just luck, that is determination." "You are wise, Mrs. Sawyer," Quinton said. "I know," Rosalie said with a grin. "That is why you married me." They laughed together, and the sound of their laughter carried across the plains, mingling with the sounds of the night. It was a good sound, a happy sound, and it seemed to sum up everything their life together had become. As the years continued to roll by, Quinton and Rosalie watched their family continue to grow and flourish. Thomas returned from university and surprised everyone by deciding to become a teacher, opening a small school in Scottsbluff where he taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to the children of ranchers and townspeople. Sarah married her young man, a kind fellow named Henry who worked at the bank, and they built a house just down the road from the ranch. Margaret and Daniel welcomed their third child, and Samuel, now a confident man in his late 20s, married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch. In the spring of 1905, Quinton and Rosalie became great-grandparents when Margaret's oldest daughter had a baby of her own. Holding that tiny infant in his arms, Quinton marveled at how much had changed since that fateful day in 1878. He was 60 years old now, his body marked by decades of hard work, but his heart was fuller than it had ever been. "What do you think Margaret would say if she could see all of this?" Quinton asked Rosalie one night as they prepared for bed. He was referring to Rosalie's sister, the woman whose death had brought them together. Rosalie was quiet for a moment, and then she smiled. "I think she would be happy," she said. "I think she would be proud of the life Samuel has had and the man he has become. I think she would be grateful that we found each other and that we gave her son a family and a home. And I think she would tell me to stop worrying about whether I did enough, because I did everything I could." "You did more than enough," Quinton said, wrapping his arms around his wife. "You gave Samuel a mother's love. You gave him a home and siblings and a future. You honored your sister's memory in the best possible way." Rosalie leaned into his embrace, and they stood there for a long time, just holding each other. After all these years, Quinton still felt the same flutter in his chest when he held her, the same sense of rightness and belonging. She was his partner, his best friend, his everything. As they climbed into bed that night, Quinton looked around the room that had seen so much of their life together. This was the room where their children had been born, where they had comforted each other through illness and grief, where they had made plans and dreamed dreams. It was filled with memories, both joyful and sorrowful, and he was grateful for every single one of them. "Quinton," Rosalie said softly in the darkness. "Yes, thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for not riding past. Thank you for trusting me," Quinton said. "Thank you for building this life with me." "I would not have wanted to build it with anyone else," Rosalie said. They fell asleep holding hands, as they had done almost every night for the past 26 years. And outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying with it the promise of another day, another season, another year to add to the beautiful, imperfect, absolutely perfect life they had created together. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's capable management, and Quinton was able to spend more time simply enjoying the fruits of his labor. He loved sitting on the porch with Rosalie, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, teaching them how to rope and ride and care for animals. He loved the big family dinners they hosted every Sunday, when all their children and grandchildren would gather around the long table and fill the house with laughter and conversation. In the summer of 1908, Quinton and Rosalie celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a grand party, inviting everyone they had ever known in Scottsbluff and beyond. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. As Quinton danced with Rosalie in the yard under strings of lanterns, he felt tears prick his eyes. "Why are you crying?" Rosalie asked, concerned. "Because I am happy," Quinton said. "Because I cannot believe how blessed we have been. 30 years ago I was alone, and now look at all of this. Look at what we have built." Rosalie smiled up at him, and he could see the same tears shining in her eyes. "We have been very blessed," she agreed. "But you know what the best part is? We still have more years ahead of us, more memories to make." "I am looking forward to every single one of them," Quinton said, and he kissed her right there in front of everyone, to the cheers and applause of their family and friends. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Quinton and Rosalie stood together on the porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, they turned to each other and smiled. "That was quite a party," Quinton said. "It was perfect," Rosalie said. "Just like our life." They went inside where Samuel and Emma were cleaning up with the help of Margaret, Sarah, and their families. Thomas had already headed back to town, promising to visit again soon. Quinton watched his family working together, laughing and teasing each other, and he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. This was what it was all about, he realized. This was why he had stopped that day by the creek. Not because he knew it would lead to all of this, because he could not have possibly known, but because something deep inside him had recognized that Rosalie and Samuel needed him. And he had needed them just as much, even if he had not realized it at the time. As the years passed, Quinton and Rosalie grew older but not less active. They remained engaged in the life of the ranch and the lives of their family members. They attended every school play, every wedding, every baptism. They were constants in the lives of their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, offering wisdom, support, and unconditional love. In the winter of 1912, Quinton caught a bad cold that turned into pneumonia. For a week, he lay in bed, feverish and weak, while Rosalie sat by his side and refused to leave. She held his hand and talked to him, reminding him of all the reasons he had to fight to get better. She told him about the grandchildren who were waiting to see him, about the spring calving season that would need his expertise, about the life they still had left to live together. And Quinton, who had always been stubborn, fought his way back to health. When he finally emerged from the bedroom, thin and pale but on his feet, the whole family celebrated. Rosalie held him tight and whispered, "Do not you ever scare me like that again." "I will do my best," Quinton promised. He recovered slowly but surely, and by spring he was back to his old self, though perhaps a bit more cautious about overdoing things. The experience had reminded both him and Rosalie of their mortality, of the fact that their time together, however blessed it had been, would not last forever. But instead of making them sad, it made them more determined to appreciate every moment they had left. They spent their days doing simple things, tending the garden, sitting on the porch, playing with their grandchildren. They talked about their life together, reminiscing about the early days and marveling at how far they had come. They told stories to their grandchildren about the Old West, about the hardships they had faced and the joys they had shared. One of their favorite stories to tell was about the day they met, and every time they told it, the grandchildren would listen with rapt attention, even though they had heard it dozens of times before. They loved hearing about how Grandpa Quinton had found Grandma Rosalie and Uncle Samuel by the creek, how he had been a hero and saved them. They loved hearing about how their grandparents had fallen in love and built the ranch and raised their family. "Will you tell us the story again, Grandpa?" Little Emma, Samuel's youngest daughter, asked one evening in the summer of 1915. Quinton looked at Rosalie and they shared a smile. "All right," he said, settling back in his chair. "It was August of 1878 and I was riding back from a cattle drive." As he told the story, Rosalie watched him with the same love and admiration she had felt all those years ago. He was 70 years old now, his hair completely gray and his face deeply lined, but to her, he was still the handsome, kind cowboy who had stopped to help a desperate woman with a baby in her arms. He was still her hero, her partner, her everything. When he finished the story, little Emma sighed contentedly. "That is my favorite story," she said. "Mine too," Quinton said, reaching over to take Rosalie's hand. "Mine too." The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Quinton and Rosalie continued to live their life with grace and gratitude. They saw Samuel's children grow up and start families of their own. They saw Thomas become one of the most respected educators in the region. They saw Margaret's ranch prosper and Sarah's husband become president of the bank in Scottsbluff. They were surrounded by love at every turn, and they never took it for granted. In the fall of 1918, as the world was recovering from the Great War that had shaken everything, Quinton and Rosalie celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 70s now, moving more slowly but still sharp of mind and full of spirit. Their children wanted to throw another big party, but Quinton and Rosalie asked for something simpler. Just family, gathered around the table for Sunday dinner. It was a beautiful afternoon, with the autumn sun casting golden light across the ranch. All of their children were there, along with their spouses and children and grandchildren. The house was packed with people, 3 generations gathered under one roof, and the noise and chaos were wonderful. As they sat around the table, Samuel stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, "to the 2 people who made all of this possible, to Ma and Pa who taught us what it means to love, to work hard, to never give up. You found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and you built something beautiful together. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me a family, a name, a future. Everything good in my life can be traced back to that day when Pa found Ma and me by the creek. So here is to 40 years of marriage and to many more to come. We love you both more than words can say." Everyone raised their glasses and echoed, "To Ma and Pa." Quinton felt tears streaming down his face, and he did not bother to wipe them away. He looked around the table at all these faces, all these people who existed because he had made the choice to stop that day to help, to love. It was overwhelming and humbling and absolutely perfect. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all for being here, for being part of this family. Your mother and I are the luckiest people in the world." Rosalie squeezed his hand and added, "When I was 19 years old, sitting by that creek with Samuel in my arms, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything. But what I did not know was that I was about to gain everything. This family, this life, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. And it is all because of your father, because he had the courage and the kindness to stop and help a stranger. I love you all so much." There was not a dry eye in the room, and for a moment, everyone just sat there, holding each other and crying happy tears. Then someone started laughing, and soon everyone was laughing, and the moment of intense emotion gave way to the usual family chaos of conversation and teasing and storytelling. As the evening wore on and the grandchildren began to fall asleep in various corners of the house, Quinton and Rosalie made their way out to the porch. It was their spot, the place where they had spent countless evenings over the past 40 years, and it felt right to end this special day there. They sat in their usual chairs, holding hands as always, and looked out at the land they loved. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was a sound they had heard thousands of times before, but tonight it felt especially poignant, a reminder of all the years that had passed and all the memories they had made. 40 years, Rosalie said softly. "Can you believe it?" "Yes and no," Quinton said. "Part of me feels like we have been together forever, but another part of me feels like it all went by in the blink of an eye." "I know what you mean," Rosalie said. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Quinton, I want you to know something. If I could go back and change what happened to Margaret and Thomas, I would do it in a heartbeat. I would give anything to have them back, to have given Samuel the chance to know his real parents. But I cannot change the past. All I can do is be grateful for what came out of that tragedy. Because as much as I miss my sister, I cannot imagine my life without you. I cannot imagine not having had these 40 years with you." "I feel the same way," Quinton said. "I would never wish for tragedy to bring people together, but I am grateful every day that it brought you to me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rosalie. You and Samuel and all of our children. You gave my life meaning and purpose. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions. But after I met you, I started really living." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Rosalie said, "Do you think we will have 40 more years together?" Quinton laughed. "That would make us both well over 100 years old. I do not think that is very likely." "Probably not," Rosalie admitted. "But whatever time we have left, I want to spend every moment of it with you." "That is a promise I can definitely keep," Quinton said. They stayed on the porch until the house had gone quiet and all their family members had either gone to bed or headed home. Then they made their way inside, moving slowly and carefully, their bodies feeling the weight of their years. But despite the aches and pains, despite the gray hair and the wrinkles, they were happy. Deeply, profoundly happy. As they lay in bed that night, Rosalie curled up against Quinton's side like she had done for 40 years. "I love you," she whispered. I love you too, Quinton said, kissing the top of her head. Always and forever. The years that followed were peaceful ones. Quinton and Rosalie gradually slowed down, letting their children take over more and more of the ranch work. They spent their time reading, gardening, and spending time with their ever-growing family. Samuel proved to be an excellent manager of the ranch, and under his leadership, it continued to prosper. Margaret's children were all grown now, with children of their own. Thomas had retired from teaching and moved back to the ranch, building a small house on the property where he spent his days writing a history of the region. Sarah and Henry had 4 children who visited the ranch regularly, bringing noise and laughter with them. In the spring of 1922, Quinton and Rosalie were sitting on the porch as they did most afternoons when Samuel came to them with news. "Emma is pregnant," he said, his face glowing with pride. "We are going to have another grandchild." Quinton and Rosalie congratulated him warmly, and after he left, they looked at each other and smiled. "Another generation," Rosalie said. "It just keeps going, does not it?" "It does," Quinton said. "That is the beauty of family. It just keeps growing and evolving and carrying on." "Do you ever think about where it all started?" Rosalie asked. "About how all of these people, all of these lives can be traced back to that one day when you decided to stop at that creek?" "I think about it all the time," Quinton said. "It is humbling, really. One decision, one moment of choosing to help instead of turning away, and look at everything that came from it. It makes you realize how important every choice we make really is." They watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The ranch spread out before them, green and thriving, dotted with cattle and horses. Smoke rose from the chimney of Thomas's little house, and they could see Margaret's grandchildren playing in the yard of the main house, their high, happy voices carrying on the evening breeze. "This is what heaven must be like," Rosalie said softly. "Being surrounded by the people you love in the place you love, with the person you love most beside you. If heaven is better than this, I cannot even imagine it," Quinton said. As the stars began to appear, they finally went inside. But they paused at the threshold, and Quinton pulled Rosalie into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, just as she always had, and for a moment they just stood there, holding each other. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Quinton asked. "About how you and Samuel had nobody but each other." "I remember," Rosalie said. "Well, I just want you to know that I have been thinking about that a lot lately," Quinton said. "And I have realized that even when we are gone, even when we are no longer here to tell our story, you and Samuel will still have more than just each other. You will have all of this family, this legacy. All these people who exist because you survived, because we found each other. That is immortality, Rosalie. That is what we are leaving behind." Rosalie looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "That is beautiful," she whispered. "And you are right. We have created something that will outlast us, something good and strong and full of love." They went to bed that night feeling at peace with their lives and their choices. They had lived fully and loved deeply, and whatever time they had left, they would continue to do so. Quinton passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1925, at the age of 79. Rosalie woke up beside him that morning and knew immediately that he was gone. She sat there for a long time, holding his hand, saying goodbye to the man who had been her everything for 47 years. When she finally called for Samuel, her voice was calm and steady. She had known this day would come eventually, and while her heart was breaking, she also felt a sense of gratitude that they had had so many wonderful years together. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Nebraska. Quinton had touched so many lives over the years, and people came from far and wide to pay their respects. Samuel gave the eulogy, speaking about the father who had raised him, loved him, and taught him everything he knew. He spoke about finding the graves of his biological parents all those years ago, and how Quinton had helped him understand that family was not just about blood, but about love and commitment. "My father was a hero," Samuel said, his voice strong despite his grief. "Not because he did anything flashy or dramatic, although he did save my mother and me, but because he made the choice, every single day, to love us and care for us and build a life with us. He was steady and strong and kind, and the world is a lesser place without him in it. But his legacy lives on in all of us who loved him, and in this ranch he built, and in the example he set. We will carry him with us always." Rosalie sat in the front row, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she listened to the words being spoken about her husband. Every story made her smile through her tears, because they were all true. Quinton had been exactly the kind of man Samuel described: steady, strong, kind, and utterly devoted to his family. After the funeral, as people were leaving, Rosalie walked out to the porch and stood there, looking out at the ranch. She could almost feel Quinton beside her, could almost hear his voice telling her that everything would be all right, and she believed it would be. He had given her the strength to survive the worst day of her life, and she would use that same strength to survive this. Rosalie lived for 3 more years after Quinton's death, and they were bittersweet years. She missed him every single day, felt his absence like a physical ache. But she also felt his presence everywhere she looked. In the ranch he had built, in the children they had raised, in the life they had created together. She spent her time surrounded by family, telling stories about Quinton, making sure that the younger generations knew what an incredible man he had been. In the spring of 1928, Rosalie's health began to fail. She was 68 years old, and her body was simply wearing out. The family gathered around her, and she spent her final days in the bedroom she had shared with Quinton, surrounded by love. Samuel sat with her every day, holding her hand and telling her how much he loved her, how grateful he was for everything she had done for him. "You gave me a life," he told her. "You and Pa both. I would not be here without you. None of us would." "I am so proud of you," Rosalie whispered, her voice weak. "You have become such a wonderful man, Samuel. Your mother would be so proud, too." "I hope so," Samuel said. "But you are my mother, Ma. You are the one who raised me, who loved me, who made me who I am, and I will never forget that." Rosalie smiled. "Tell everyone I love them," she said. "Tell them to take care of each other. Tell them to remember what your father and I taught them." "I will," Samuel promised. That night, as the sun was setting and the ranch was bathed in golden light, Rosalie closed her eyes and took her last breath. She went peacefully, with a smile on her face, and those who were with her said it looked like she was seeing something beautiful. Samuel believed she was finally reunited with Quinton, and the thought brought him comfort. His parents, the people who had saved him and raised him and loved him unconditionally, were together again. And wherever they were, he knew they were at peace. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and then under his children's management, and then under their children's management. The story of Quinton and Rosalie became a family legend, passed down through the generations, always told with reverence and love. The porch where they had spent so many evenings became a sacred spot, a place where family members would go to feel close to the couple who had started it all. Years turned into decades, and the world changed in ways that Quinton and Rosalie could never have imagined. But the ranch remained, and the family remained, a living testament to 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and had built something beautiful together. And whenever anyone in the family faced hardship or uncertainty, They would remember the story of the cowboy who found a woman with a baby in her arms, who heard her say, "We have nobody but each other," and who replied with his actions, if not his words, "Then let us become a family." They would remember that love and kindness and courage could overcome anything, and they would find the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because that was the legacy of Quinton Sawyer and Rosalie Richardson, a legacy that would endure forever.